div containers are so generic in their function that you would rarely, if ever, use them this plainly. As you see in my example, I just added a div container to wrap everything in, and I basically didn't do more than that. But the problem is that the div container, which just stands for division in HTML, offers very little semantic value in the document. And although it's used mainly as a tool for laying out and grouping together certain objects, you really need to also add some sort of semantic value to those elements. Otherwise, they're adding code into HTML, which is just for presentational purposes, is highly questionable, and you definitely don't want to do that because, again, HTML is only meant for semantic information and content, and the CSS is meant to do all that presentational kind of stuff. So, with that said, I want to discuss, well, one of two common attributes that you would add to the div element in your HTML. And the main element I want to talk about, the main attribute I want to talk about is an ID. An ID is a unique name that you create to associate to a div container that is something unique on the page. Um, well, let's just kind of go through my document over here and we'll talk about what's unique. Now, very common practice. It's very common to wrap everything that you have uh, in your body, the content, in a div container because it allows you that control. So you notice how I wrapped everything in this div class, but I didn't give it any name. So what we could do here, I'm going to go up to the div and I'm going to give it a space. I'm going to start with ID. And here we go. ID is something that could only happen once on the page. And that, for example, is a container. So I'm going to name that entire class that I used to wrap up all my HTML content in a div container. I'm going to name it the container class. Okay, now I actually want to wrap a couple of more things in their own unique divs. For example, I want to wrap this top element here, which I think I called my banner. Then this would be a portrait. This would be biography, education, employment, and so on. So let me refer back to the finished product. Using this web developer plugin that I downloaded for Firefox, I can go to, I believe it's information and display div order. And now this is highlighting all my different div containers. Now I think if you see up top at the very, very top, it says div container. Now this will make more sense as we start building. Now let's see what my current document looks like if I go information and div order. So the only thing I have now is this div1. So let me save this and give this a refresh. And what happened? It didn't seem to do anything. Let's see. I did div ID. ID equals container. Maybe I'm not looking at the right document. Okay, there we go. Let's see, display div order. Okay, that looks about right. All right, now you see that after I named it div container, my web developer plugin gave me that out there. Okay, so now everything, you notice how it's highlighted in red, everything is within that container. So let me create a new one. So what do I have in there? So inside of my banner class, I need to wrap all of this good stuff in there. So let me do just that. I'm going to go div. Actually, let me zoom in over here. I'm going to go div, then ID equals, and since I already used container, it can't be container again. It has to be something unique. And I said it was going to be banner. Okay, very good. And then what I'll do is down at the bottom where it all ends, I'm going to / and have it end that div container. Because I'm often adding containers, I like to put comments on where they end for myself. So this isn't going to be visible to people viewing my page, but it's going to be visible to me when I'm editing my document. So what I like to do is do just that. I'm going to put in ends banner. And I generally do this for all of my containers. That way, if I'm having some issues, it'll be easier to uh, check out or to dissect. Let's see. So now I'm going to refresh this page, and that kind of went away. And I say div order, and look at that. Now I know that I'm wrapped up in my banner class and in my container. Okay, so let me keep on going down the line, and I'm going to fill all these things up. Rather, I'm going to put all these things in their own unique div IDs. So I've finished wrapping all of my elements, all of my content in their own little div containers, and I just want to mention two rules that you want to follow when naming them, and one recommendation. So the first rule needs to be that make the names semantic. That's very important. You don't want to name something, for example, you don't want to name this top banner, and you don't want to name this next div or something like that, because guess what? These elements could work in any sort of layout. So your quote unquote top banner could actually end up being placed to the left or underneath something, not making it at the top anymore. So all of a sudden, the fact that you named it something that had a presentational kind of thing to it already makes it not appropriate, you know? So I have my big container class. I've named things banner, portrait, biography, education, employment, honors, and publications. Um, I guess part of that too about make it semantic, also make it consistent. You notice how, I mean, I had honors, memberships, and affiliations, but for myself, I said I'm just going to name it honors and um, whatever. I mean, the idea is it wouldn't make it wrong to name it this whole thing, but it certainly would take a long time to type it out. So, first order, make it semantic. The second rule would be you cannot start these things with either a non-numerical character or a number. So you can't name this one banner. For example, what I mean is education has to start with an E. You can't start it with an underscore. You can't start it with a squiggly line. You can't start it with a number. Now, to be clear, you could obviously start it with anything you want, but you may just get inconsistent results. Some browsers will just ignore it. Some browsers may not. If you're working with JavaScript, it'd be tough to target things. Anyway, I guess short of why that is the case is because it's not the proper code, and what may happen by using those kind of naming conventions is you're definitely going to have inconsistent results. And I guess the last thing I would say, which is not a rule but a recommendation, is use lowercase all the time. um, that way, when what we haven't covered yet is that these IDs we use later to target in our CSS. So by having them all lowercase, you kind of minimize the errors you may have or problems you may have targeting these elements.